scriptures evolve as well and relate more to things as they change is important. So maybe that submission has come to mean in our culture, or should mean obedience or total giving, total self-gift back to husband.
And husband to wife.
And
Yes.
husband to wife, although
So there
that is
should
right,
be
that is not said in
mutual
there,
submission.
right.
And that's
Right, the
problem.
subsequent
That's
verses,
the problem.
a
Yeah,
lot
that's
of
the
people leave
problem.
the subsequent, or they don't encourage
Yeah.
ceremonies, but, or masses, whatever, but
Mhm.
it's the subsequent verses as well. And it happens in First Peter as well. He
Mhm.
talks about, he says women are the weaker sex, but doesn't mean that they're just some inferior little, women are just some weak creature in necessarily, but just that, I think he's talking about spiritually, just being completely different in how
Sensitive.
women are nurturing and so forth. Not weaker in like, you're not worthy or anything like that. And I think it's all in how people, like you said, the Bible was written at what time, you know? It's for us to be able to understand what was truly meant by that, as opposed to, you know, taking for every word for what it is. You would think, oh man, it's okay to have slaves today. And
It also
that's
said,
what they-
fathers don't nag your children, but I mean,
Yeah.
it didn't mean, okay, moms, go ahead, you be the nags. That's
Yeah.
not what that
That's
is.
what happens though, isn't it really?
Okay, well, anyway, you can have a lot of good discussions on this, that's for sure. All right, so now we're gonna start talking briefly about ARTs, artificial reproduction technologies. We somewhat breached this last week, talking about embryonic stem cells. So nonetheless, I think what starts here is, okay, first of all, you know, we all, if you have, we probably have all known people who have struggled to have children. So you could honestly understand the anguish, and especially, I know one couple who, I think they have tried regularly to have children from throughout their marriage, and he was 40 and she was 38 when they had their first child. At the very least, they understood the full concept of gift, and how, yes, this child was given to me, and not in an overly romantic way, right? But they fully understand that this somehow, you know, especially we have to realize from a Christian standpoint that we're not, again, the parents of the soul. So just as it says in Scripture, I've produced a man with the help of the Lord. I mean, he's never outside of this. So I think what's important is that we love to have control, we love to have our rights, you know, especially, there's a great book, I think, by Marianne Glendon, who's I think a law professor from up at Harvard, and talks about how we're a rights talk, R-A-G-H-T-S, you know, everything's rights. So we tend then to think of that in terms of children. We have a right to children. And we don't technically have a right, even though there's a duty involved. Usually, you know, in Catholic moral theology, where duties are always, you know, flowing from rights. But, you know, not when we're talking about human people, okay? This is a different thing. So we have to watch starting out with our plans, which is very difficult, right? Because, you know, we all want to have an organized life. So I'm going to get married at this age, I'm going to do this, I'm going to have 2 kids, but not until I have my house, my car. You know, we start that way. And some young couples will say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, it's not that it's something wrong necessarily with having some general overview on how you'd like your life to go. I mean, that seems to be quite natural. But did you start out by really asking what God wants of you? Perhaps you'll be introducing people into your family that are not, you know, your genetic offspring. Perhaps he'll be calling that to you. Perhaps he'll be calling you to a larger family. Perhaps not. Perhaps he foresees something down the future. And I mean, it really comes down to the trust in the beginning of this. So it's rather than start out with the plan, which everybody knows you can't really do when you're 21. I mean, I had my plan when I was 21. It didn't work out that way. And one of them would be, I never in a million years would be a high school teacher. Well, okay. And I have to at least share this. You know, I was always a smart aleck in school. My friend put in his yearbook, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? He put down he wanted to be a shepherd, you know, just to be funny. I put down theologian, and I mean, I can't even make that up. At my 30th high school reunion, which I guess I never brought it up before, I told some of my classmates, and my wife was getting a kick. They were laughing, walking away. And the one said, well, what kind of theology? I said, moral theology. They said, well, you knew everything bad to do. I guess you just tell them not to do that and you're good. So we don't know what our plans are in the future. Well, we have to watch that with children. So I only say that because, you know, when I'm addressing here when artificial reproduction technologies are used, you know, in an immoral way. So I'm not trying to lump them all into that. You know, fertility, you know, treatments are certainly worthwhile, but we have to watch that this will stem from that. This is the problem. That I then will own this child. There's all kinds of things that may come out of this. So just something that we keep an understanding of what's in the plan. And also, we're not always very comfortable but we have to stand out as Christians. On our bodies are not our own. It's that simple. My whole person belongs to my wife. I have to entrust her with that. And likewise her with me. So we don't always like that, you know. We want to have total control over our bodies, and it includes all types of things. But our whole life is God. So, you know, I never, you know, we use in philosophy the alterity. I never give up my own identity, even though I hand over my whole person to my wife. I still remain separate. And likewise with her. So, I mean, again, this is that, you know, cardinal skull, the asymmetrical reciprocity we talk about. So, you know, your format says here the desire for children is a good one. It's given to us by God. I mean, it's quite natural for us to want to share the love and have a concrete manifestation of that love. And it's our desire is cut up in our sexual differentiation. So, and our need for communion. I mean, those two things, and this is why I'm saying that this understanding of the difference between the sexes is important. There's a complementary there. I mean, it's built into us. So it stems from that, and our idea for that we want to come together, we want to build one, and it just all proceeds from that. It's somewhat subtle, but it's still a very important point. So the procreative and unitive dimensions of the human person, they're not extrinsic to us. And this goes back to that law and freedom are not opposites. That if we can understand, first of all, we should be amazed and blessed that there is a plan, there's a design for us, and then we can know that design. And then the closer that we get into that design, the freer we are. So freedom really is the ability to do that which we were designed to do, not autonomy. So we have to watch modern freedom showing up here and saying, hold on, you know, I want to do what I want to do, rather than can we work within the designs we have. So anyway, and we know we're built for love. We could probably spend a lot of time just talking about an understanding of gift one to the other person. I know I could. But anyway, so whatever the context is, there's a manifestation for love that comes out. So it says here, ARTs separate the life-giving and the unifying purposes of married love and transform the creation of new life into a transaction. You know, I watch using certain language because, you know, I don't like spelling out somebody else's intentions, all right? Their intentions could be quite loving. Their intentions could be that they're not reducing it to a transaction. I don't think that makes it good, okay? Again, we are not situation ethicists. We talked briefly about that. Even when it's motivated by love, we still have to ask, what is it that we're doing, okay? A scientific environment by a technician. And I don't particularly like that line, whose motive is not love. I don't know what the scientist's motive is, to be quite honest. But it's anecdotal. It's not. This is still wrong. All right. Well, I would say the child is not received as a gift, but is produced. Now, the child being reduced to the object. Okay, there's always a chance of that, more so. But there's also, again, I want to work away from that and look at this a little bit different way. I'm going to read a paragraph from Donum Vitae, which is a document from the CDF, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, from 1987. It's 2A1. It's a little bit lengthy, but it's worth reading. It says, for human procreation has specific characteristics by virtue of the personal dignity of the parents and of the children. The procreation of a new person, whereby the man and woman collaborate with the power of the Creator, must be the fruit and the sign of the mutual self-giving of the spouses, of their love and their fidelity. It's just, you know, the understanding that how warm it is for a child. I'm not just talking about emotionally, that, you know, I'm the result of love. I was intentionally brought into the world by the love of two people. Okay, now, is that ideal? Are there situations that don't rise to that? Certainly. But isn't, you know, we're not just putting out an ideal, we're saying, you know, this is what we should be aiming for. The fidelity of the spouses and the unity of marriage involves reciprocal respect of their right to become a father and a mother only through each other. The child has a right to be conceived, carried in the womb, brought into the world and brought up within marriage. It is through the secure and recognized relationships to his own parents the child can discover his own identity and achieve his own proper human development. The parents find in their child a confirmation and completion of the reciprocal self-giving. In other words, this is where you learn love, in the home. You say charity begins at home. Well, this is, it doesn't mean you should start doing things charitable at home. Maybe that's what it does mean, but your understanding of love, this is where you find it from. The child is the living image of their love, a permanent sign of their conjugal union, the living and dissoluble concrete expression of their paternity and maternity. By reason of the vocation and social responsibilities of the person, the good of the children and the parents contribute to the good of civil society. And we could go on talking about the family as a cell of society, but there are certain things here we didn't talk about in marriage, permanent characteristics that have always been this way. There's some things that we can find, even anthropologists, secular anthropologists will say, have been throughout society. You could always find pockets where things have changed, but we have to watch as we try, we see different people trying to redefine certain aspects of what constitutes a family. In other words, the church would say that this preceded governments. Governments don't really have, we understand they have legal things they can do, but they really don't have a moral right to change something that preceded them, all right? The tradition of the church and anthropological reflection recognizes a marriage in its indissoluble unity, the only setting worth of truly responsible procreation. We know that within marriage, how the intimate act, the conjugal act, how vulnerable it is, a total giving of one to the other person. Marriage is obviously a place where that is kept safe. The problem is that young people always think the one that they are dating is they'll be with forever. Is it true that some people from high school stay married? Yes, we all know that, but typically it's not going to be the case. And unfortunately, I've often termed it as like pornography of the mind. You will bring every last sexual experience with you into your marriage, and it never quite leaves. You'll wrestle with that. It'd be nice to do a little skit sometime where you have like two students dressed up like a groom and a bride, and as they're saying vows, other men start coming up on stage. Who is it? These are past relationships. This is always partly there, So this total giving of the person, it too, and this is what we'll have to watch, and this is where I think it boils down to. Once you remove love from truth, and truth is something very objective, you have a sentiment. So we have to be very careful that, where it's two young people that are engaged in intercourse, which I'm not aware of any Christian denomination that doesn't say that's a sin. They always give expressions of love to each other. I love you, but is that really based in a truth, or is it based in a sentiment that they're feeling? So we have to just keep that in the back of the mind. Anyway, the most common ART is in vitro fertilization. So it requires the sperm to be collected from the male, typically in masturbation, and then the woman is given drugs for hyperovulation, and those are surgically removed, and they're harvested, and then they're fertilized in vitro. And then a sampling of the embryos are then placed, I'm guessing it would take a few weeks, placed back into the woman's uterus, and then any extra embryos are either destroyed at that point or frozen, all right? Which brings us back to the stem cell, embryonic stem cell debate that we had last week. So that's the process. There's various levels here that the church is opposed to. One, the way that the sperm is collected, and two, that the fertilization happens outside. Now, at some point, again, we all sympathize with couples that are infertile and how this produces. And talking about this, we do talk about it sometimes with the students. They will, what was it, 1979 when the first, and I don't like the word, but that's how it was called, test tube child. Was it 1979? Well, what if I was brought into the world like that? What does that mean? Does that mean that somehow I'm less, somehow, not whatsoever. This is never an indication of how, of the individual that was brought into the world. And then the person says, well, I may not have a lot of the negative feelings that you're having, that you're trying to lay out here. Well, I understand that, but if we've broken something, and that is the unitive and procreative aspects of marriage, these two things are quite connected. In other words, they would make the argument that they really can't be severed. Once you sever one, you've lost the other, even if you think, well, I really haven't. So in vitro fertilization is understood to be something as an intrinsic evil. No intention, no motive, no matter how noble, could undo that. There's other instances where, and this one, well, I don't know, have you ever heard of GIFT? Gamete intrafallopian transfer. Okay, this one's kind of, Catholic moral theologians would say, look, be very cautious, and I would recommend against this. But it's out yet, exactly what happens. So they would still collect sperm. And I'm just going to tell you what it is, and then you can discuss and argue if you think that it's just a way to get around it, which is what some moral theologians would say. Oh, it just sounds a way to get around certain things. So they'll collect the sperm during intercourse using a perforated condom. And the woman then eggs will be harvested, and then there's different variations on this, but one variation is that the egg and the sperm will be placed in a catheter tube, separated by an air pocket, and then directly put into the fallopian tube. And then they will allow fertilization to happen within the woman. Now, we've circumvented, well, see, this is the issue. Somebody will say, well, you're just really playing fast and loose. You're circumventing the sexual act. Well, I guess people say it depends on how you look at it. Are we just aiding it? In other words, there's a principle in Catholic bioethics that you can, as long as you're not impeding something, or if you're trying to, say, to restore the function of something, then you're really not circumventing it. So they did have intercourse, even though it was collected outside, and the fertilization happened inside. The fertilization did happen because of the intercourse. It's one of these things that no pronouncements, if you want to call it that, have come down. Most Catholic bioethicists say, this one is just getting too close. But I guess why it's worth bringing it up is, and people will say, well, you're really getting in these technical rules and really putting all this out. But I think it should show something about how the church understands that this is an issue. I mean, this is no little thing. I mean, couples who struggle with infertility for whatever reason it might be, it's a real issue, and it's a strain on the marriage. And are there ways that could be done illicitly to help these, these couples? This is one way that's been, I don't know really who started this, and to be honest, outside of even the Catholic sphere, the way I understand it, this would be done in vitro fertilization, and then the embryo would be implanted. But at least there are some Catholic theologians who say, well, as long as the fertilization happens within the woman, then it's okay. Has everybody heard of it, of GIFT before? Yeah, it's quite different, quite different. But it's one of those things we talked before about. There's some things out there that just have not yet, they haven't come down either way. They're still kind of mulling this stuff over. Anyway, that's really the sum of it on artificial reproduction technologies. I mean, you can go on and on about that. But there's a lot of peripheral things, that, and I think the frozen embryos, I mean, you never just simply fertilize 2 eggs and put 2 eggs in. Octomon, we all heard of Octomon, right? And she got, in a weird way, she really got ridiculed because who was going to pay for these kids, which turns out that it looks like the state did, right? But what I've read about it was that she, at least, I guess from a Catholic moral standpoint, not that she's Catholic, she would have been lauded because once the eggs were fertilized, she could not have imagined destroying or freezing some. So she asked that all be implanted, and that's how she had 8 kids. Some people say that was irresponsible. Well, what would be the alternative? To destroy these embryos? So, I mean, so there's a lot of other things that come out of these technologies that, you could really, now what do you do in custody cases? I mean, this is where this stuff really gets sticky. And then, what about in your will? I mean, nobody lives forever, people die young. Who do you will your frozen embryos to? What happens in a divorce case? What happens in a divorce case and then a person gets remarried and now she wants her embryos, but the husband who's married to somebody else says, no, you don't get that. So, I mean, all those things, even though they're not central to this, they're things that I think people who are consequentialists or proportionalists, right? Proportionalist weighs the two things. You know, we weigh all the goods. Well, how can you possibly know that you have all the goods that you can weigh? I mean, how do you know there's not things out there? A consequentialist would even say, well, I want to look at the consequences of this and I'll weigh those. Well, how do you know of all the consequences? There's quite a bit out there that comes from this. So, in a nutshell, we have to be careful that we're not simply doing something because we can. We should be asking questions all along, ought we do it? And, you know, in the end, it's maybe no solace for a couple that cannot have a child and for whatever reason don't want to take an adoption, but you don't know what is God asking you to do. Again, I mean, it's suffering, and you don't want to say, you know, it could be redemptive. That's not solace for somebody. That's like, well, that's my story, so I'm supposed to accept this. You know, there's no easy answers for it, but we have to be very careful that we're not going to do evil that good may come of it. Okay, on to contraception. It says contraception acts to thwart the natural function of the body, to change it in the case of the woman of the pill, to masculinize it. I have to tell you, I'm not quite sure what that means. So I'm just going to talk about it how I understand it, which is probably easier for me. I want a few things up front, because when I got to tell you, I have probably given more talks on contraception than anything else, and not because it's a particular, like, you know, dream of mine to talk about it. It just seems to be that that's where it goes. As far as I know, I've never changed anybody's opinion, so I must be very bad at it, except for, I don't know if I shared with you, the two Jehovah's Witnesses. I live in this Bermuda Triangle of, you know, people that knock on my door. So it's either the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons, or the Baptists, and my family's quite tired of talking about a lot of this, so I'm always happy when friends come over to play. So, and I'm very respectful, they would not come back. So one young married Jehovah's Witness couple, as far as I know, are the only people that have changed their minds. After 2 full Saturdays of talks, they emailed me and said they're rethinking the whole thing. So anyway, I always tell them when I give a talk, if anybody had thought differently and changed their mind, please tell me so I can start my winning record. Anyway, but you also get two people. We have to go back and think real quick. When we're determining the moral object of an act, what does that mean, right? The fact that somebody takes, you know, the pills that come laid out just like contraception is, may not be contraception. There are other reasons why women take these pills, but you know, excessive bleeding, acne. It's not something you want to take just for a few pimples, right? But excessive acne, cyst, yes, yeah, the cyst, or it could be psychological mood swings, okay, and there's others. That person's not all contraception. That person's just being treated for a pathology. The OBGYN, yes, they're going to call it contraception. I get it. They're going to, the pill. They'll say, here, you're on the pill. But they're not interested in defining the moral object. So, no, that person is not on contraception, but, and I tell the young girls, but if you are on it for whatever reason, and then you think, well, now I could have sex and not get pregnant, congratulations, you have now now you're in contraception. You've now turned it into that act. So, that being said, and there's always side effects, and I don't stress this because it's really peripheral to this, but a girl down the street from me, you know, was on Yaz and did have a stroke. So, I mean, it's like all drugs have side effects, but you know, we always have to be careful. My experience has been is that most, I'm going to say medical personnel are very responsible with this. A woman's not going to go in to see her psychologist and they're going to think, you know, hey, maybe it's just mood swings, let's put you on this. That's not the first line of action. It's usually, you know, comes after quite some time and some, you know, verification through family and other observations. But anyway, there's always side effects, right? I did want to share this though, again, because I wanted to get it out of the way in the beginning because it's interesting. a little scientific study, and this goes, and the only reason I'm bringing this up is not to try to say, see, people shouldn't take it. I have other reasons why they shouldn't. But we never know, as with consequentialism, right? Even if somebody says, okay, so it's a drug, but there's a lot of other drugs, why can't we just take this? We know the side effects. We don't always know, all the things that are weighed out there. So I found 2 studies. One was the pill makes women pick bad mates, and the other one was birth control messes with monkey business. And what they found was that there's these major histocompatibility complex genes, and these are involved with immune response and other functions. And when individuals with different MHC genes mate, their offspring's immune system can recognize a broader range of foreign cells. So in other words, their immune systems are better. Well, what happens is, and I guess is what they're thinking from the evolutionary biologists, is that you are put in a state of your body, you're tricking your body to think it's pregnant, right? So there might be certain aspects, chemicals that are not being released, and people cannot really tell the difference. How do you want to say? I don't want to get it too wrong. Not only could MHSC similarity in couples lead to fertility problems, said lead researcher Stuart Greg Roberts, who's an evolutionary psychologist at the University of Newcastle in England, but it could ultimately lead to a breakdown in relationships. Women stop using the contraceptive pill. And odor perception plays a significant role in maintaining attraction to partners. So when there's no selection pressure, when you're say the pregnant state, evolutionary speaking, your body's always in a post-mating state.
This works for promiscuity as well.
Yeah.
The more that you stimulate those particular pheromones and those hormones in your brain, the less likely you are to actually make a decision. So as the number of sexual partners increases, the likelihood for divorce also increases. And the likelihood of mental health issues long-term increases. And it works in both sexes. So there's biological evidence that you're meant to have one sexual partner. That you're hardwired from not.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you said that, because that's actually with the next study. This woman who did studies with lemur monkeys, and she's trying to be very cautious. We just can't just extrapolate that to humans, but it should be studied. It says when asked to rate the attractiveness of male odors, women are generally more attracted to men whose sense signify an immune system quite different to their own. Such a preference ostensibly leads to children with the most versatile disease defense possible. But this preference seems to lessen when women take hormone contraceptions. And what you said here, one study, and they're hyperlinked, but I don't have the study, men's responses may have also been scrambled. In one study, men gave more money to strippers as those strippers approached ovulation, and very little money if they were on the pill. So it's a work hazard, right? That's a joke. So anyway, they talk about this medroprogesterone, which is Depo-Provera, right? The chemical profiles have changed radically in pre and post contraceptive states, and of the hundreds of chemicals that identified, the abundance of classes entirely plummeted. I mean, they were gone. And they said the male lemurs, when they put the females on contraception, they started spending less time with the females. And they said, this woman, her name is Drea, she says it has effects on other aspects of physiology and behavior. But my only point is that this is, I agree, we're all hardwired, but for a consequentialist, again, how did you have all the information? We don't quite know how all this goes. I mean, how deep is our relationality? How deep is our sexuality? In other words, I never did it, but what I was going to do, one of my theses on was the sex of the soul. How deep does our maleness and femaleness go? So nonetheless, that's all these things are true. There's side effects and such, and they're all things that people should take into consideration. And I liked some of these studies. I like the psychology. It's interesting to read, but we're going at it from a slightly different angle here. So okay, so we know how contraception works, right? It suppresses ovulation. That's its main way. It could also thicken the cervical mucus, so it hinders the movement of the sperm. Or it, another way, makes the lining of the uterus, the endometrium wall, thin, so that implantation. And we can't settle this now. The science on some of that goes back and forth. People argue each way. The AMA changed the designation of a pregnancy from fertilization to implantation so they can get the side effect as an abortifacient off the bottle. There are some OBGYNs that say, well, look, once this hormone is released, that wall would automatically get thickened, you wouldn't have breakthrough ovulation, which is what happens. So in essence, if there is breakthrough ovulation, if the sperm does make up the fallopian tube and the egg does get released, and then this makes its way down into the uterus, it would not implant into the wall and then simply discharge. At that point, we have a spontaneous abortion, which then is the one person culpable. Well, you should have known. Okay, so this is what I would tell even married people who are using contraception. Well, again, I don't want to use it that way, but are using the same hormones as the pill for other reasons. You're going to have to be very careful, because if you have sexual intercourse during the fertile period, it could be between a 2 and 4% chance that you're going to have breakthrough ovulation and that you'll have fertilization. So you're going to have to, we'll talk about NFP briefly, you're going to have to practice that even though you're on that medicine for other reasons, because your body's not going to know any different to it. This is the issue now. And by the way, that was one of the issues with the young Jehovah's Witness couple, because at the very least, they were absolutely opposed to abortion from the point of fertilization. And with that knowledge, it said, well, let's rethink. This is the case. The Catholic Church is not against birth control. That's the first thing we gotta kind of throw out there. They're against contraception. Birth control is simply controlling your births, okay? So Pope Francis said, well, we don't have to breed like rabbits. But there's some blessings to large families, right? There's a lot of things that you learn in a large family. But the idea that you have to have a child every time you have sex, this whole thing, it's not, and again, going back to only 1-2 children, it's not that you shouldn't be part of that conversation, it's that don't exclude God. So start out. So are there serious, because some of the people, even young kids, but even some of the engaged couples will say, well, what would be good serious reasons not to have a child at the time? I said, well, okay, financial problems. I said, it could be illness. I said, there's a multitude of ones. Go and talk to your priest. They'll probably drop over that somebody's coming to them and saying they'd like to be part of this conversation. I said, but the whole thing changes, and that's really, in the end, we'll get to that in a second. I really think that's, in the end, what's nice about it. Now, here's the thing, and there's so many different ways you can go about this. So somebody will say, okay, why is it, this is the church's thing, right? This is the Catholic thing. Why is the Catholic Church the only one yet against contraception? Well, it's not, primarily. But here's, okay, so how did we look, how far back does contraception go? Well, as far back as history goes, right? They've been using either the skins, intestinal skins, the acidic crocodile dung, you name it, it's been used. Okay, so there was a time, and Martin Luther, the founder of the Lutheran Church, even said contraception is more heinous a sin than incest. Well, that might be hard for us to kind of fathom. There's the scriptural thing of Onan, when Onan spilled the seed. We have to watch, because some of that can go, depends on the argument. It's very particular, because there was a time when it was thought, for much of history, that the man contained all the genetic seed, and the woman basically was the soil. I mean, and that may sound rather naive to us, but, if we didn't have good modern biology, it makes sense, right? You put seeds in the ground and they grow. So that, in a sense, may have been thought as an abortion. Some people will say, yeah, well, once we started learning that, women have eggs, which was probably in the 1700s, and at least by the early 1800s, they knew for sure biologically that, man will produce eggs. But even after that point, it's always brought up, and I think it's a good historical point, that the Lambeth Conference, this is the conferences for the Anglican Church, and they meet about every 10 years. So in 1920, we find absolute universal, every single Christian denomination, without exception that I'm unaware of, if there is any, were opposed to contraception. Okay, now let's just pretend that it's not because we thought that it was an abortion happening because the man had all the seed. We now know, even after that point, all Christian denominations were opposed to it, unified. And even in 1920, the Lambeth Conference was very outspoken against it. If I had the text, it talked pretty hard. Between that and 1930, things changed. All of a sudden in 1930, they start talking about it can be used within marriage for very serious reasons. And that pretty much just opened up the floodgates. And now we stand where other denominations might talk about it, but the church is kind of carrying the torch on this one. Nobody else is going out and saying, hey, we're totally against this. It seems like it's an affront to our own liberty, right? Because we're very autonomous beings. Again, we don't want to see, can we work with the design that we have? And I've never personally understood, as we talk about natural family planning, why more people who are so, I don't mean it diminishingly, but naturalists, in a sense, you do things that are natural rather than, use chemicals. I don't understand why they haven't latched on to this, but they haven't. So you have this, and I guess if we had more time, which we don't, I could even go back and talk a little bit about how the evolution of the pill, and starting with Margaret Sanger, if you ever get an opportunity, just research something on the woman. When she put out the birth control review, which you can get all of these as PDFs online, okay, so you don't have to read what somebody else is writing about, you can go and read. And she pretty much wanted either rich white people to use birth control so they can get out of the house, or she wanted to use it for what she called the failure of the melting pot, because she wanted these indigenous people to stop breeding. And it was also, and I know I'm lumping a lot of stuff here together, but it's interesting history. A lot of this was tied into the eugenics movement, which people are always terribly surprised to find out how strong the eugenics movement in the United States was, and that even the eugenics laws in Germany during the 1930s, before we found out the horrors of the Holocaust, were patterned after the eugenics laws in the United States. And they were applauding all of this. I mean, there's a lot of history that goes beyond all of this. So then you also have to keep in mind that contraception was considered under the blue laws. I think it was Griswold versus Connecticut, I think, that eventually overturned it. So it was offensive material that it was not allowed to be transported over state lines. That was not the Catholic Church who put the legislation in effect. It was the Protestant, legislators that saw that. So we asked, what changed? All we did was not change. Well, what changed? Why are we being the only heralds of this? Well, rather than going too far on that, let me just quick and briefly go into what natural family planning is and why I think, women really make out in this. It totally pulls the man away from easily objectifying the woman. It totally pulls him away from that. First of all, before you even become a father and a mother, you're already practicing this. So you're already preparing yourself for a child. You may, for serious reasons, say, not now. This is not a good time. So what do? A woman, okay, sperm is viable within the vaginal cavity, they say, for 6-7 days. An egg is viable for 2 days, so let's just lump it together, 9 days, all right? So a woman has a fertility period basically for 9 days. My wife always says, I hope you're not telling teenage girls that. They'll use it for birth control. Like, they can't even remember to do their homework, let alone keep all this stuff figured out. But nonetheless, so if for serious reasons you're avoiding a pregnancy, then you simply avoid sexual intercourse during those 9 days. Now somebody says, well, isn't that just Catholic contraception? Well, no. Okay, for one, we understand our design and we're working within our design. And I can't share personally, obviously, but that is probably one of the most tender times between a couple. Because why? The woman knows that she's safe from being objectified. She knows, hold my hand. Just look at me. Again, I don't mean to sound sexist, but it's harder for a guy to understand that. I want you to love me. A guy, well, I do love you. No, me. Well, I do love you. It's a little harder for us to sink in, and I think it's partly because our fertility's outside of the body. We don't quite understand that. With the woman, it's really working in. So the man's brought into the woman's her cycle and into her fertility, and there's a level of respect that grows with that. And then when it is time, because to have sexual intercourse outside of that point of fertility, you're not going to have a child. Okay, this isn't even the rhythm method of some years ago. The various different forms of natural family planning, quite frankly, if a couple is having fertility issues, probably would utilize the very techniques that NFP practitioners and users have. So it's one of those beautiful instances that I think first of all, it protects the marriage. It puts it on a level of respect. It puts on a level of communication. It's not simply one getting satisfied at the other's expense. It's thoughtful. It could be spontaneous. It could be all those things, and it works. And I don't quite understand why the total opposition to this. Because it's not that we're just easier to take the pill, but it's not necessary. Some people might even say, well, why is it that the Catholic Church doesn't have a problem with Viagra, but they have a problem with this? Because people get them conflated because they're both used, maybe in a sexual context. But Viagra is the restoration of an organ. There's no disease. Pregnancy is not a disease. So there's something else going on here, and and if we want to have marriages, like you say, sister, that are spanning, decades, this only brings that level of communication to a deeper level. Most couples I know that do it are it's quite beautiful. The divorce rate, okay, nothing's foolproof, right? The divorce rate's reported to be, 2-3%. Things still happen. I mean, nobody's perfect. And can you still objectify the other spouse during this? Well, sure you could. Could you have the wrong intention? Well, sure you could. But it's a little more safeguarded. So, thoughts?
I do think the male has evolved. I mean, I think it's wonderful what you're saying, but I think it's still evolving.
How do you mean, like when you say they evolve?
Well, into the sense of a mutual respect, of intimacy, of really talking with each other,
Sure.
of planning, but I do, folks that I meet up with, the male's the aggressor. When they want what they want when they want it, and I think that's pretty much indicative of the whole feminine evolution, is to have some kind of control over your body, and not to always be carrying babies. I think there was generations where there were just baby after baby after baby, because of also the church's teaching, and I just think it's really on an intimacy level and a growing consciousness of one another and respect as human beings and the God dwelling within. Those are huge, gigantic steps that I think come about over a long period of time. We may be fortunate, some of us may be very fortunate, to have grown up in families where we could see some of that behavior being done. A lot of people have not. And so I think for women in the whole feminization movement, it was because they were not looked in the eye. They were not, really treated well. So that the use of contraceptions became a way of protection, to always having children, or not having the intimacy with their partner, or not being able to get to that next step. I just think it's an evolution and a consciousness and a discussion, a lot of talking, a lot of really soul searching, the soul, the sexual soul that you were talking about.
Well, what I was trying to say is that I believe
Yeah.
that we're male, and I would not like to think that, after I die, my, non-male soul, goes to heaven. I'd like to think that I retain my maleness, She laughs.
But you'll be probably a little bit more balanced with because you have a feminine side to you, or else you would not be able to.
Yeah, well, okay, I think this is, you talk about what you learn in marriage, I remember, you want to just talk about like a priest who may struggle more with that. I heard Bishop Fulton Sheen say once that if they don't have such a strong relationship with Mary, how they can really become tyrants, right? So you need something.
Generally, that's true. Let me tell you, it's generally true.
Well, but my point is that we struggle with this, and I think NFP it has a much better approach to that. Well, I think it's infinitely more. With contraception, the woman could be ready when the man is ready. I mean, in other words, she's always ready. That's never an option. The communication isn't necessary. That doesn't mean that that's necessary. It doesn't mean that because two people are on contraception, therefore the man objectifies the woman. I'm not trying to make that point, because really that's anecdotal to this. I understand this and believe, as the church says, that this is an intrinsic evil. And I'm trying to make the point in a very short amount of time that all Christianity said that. So when I was talking to the Jehovah's Witness, I said, okay, your church has been around at least from the mid-1800s. You were opposed to this. Well, we don't know that we were. I said, well, where did you ever talk about it? I mean, we don't have any, everybody was talking against this up until the mid-19th century, 20th century, mid-20th century. So what changed? That's, I think, a person has an intellectual honesty with themselves to address that.
But I wonder if back there, way back, when they were saying against contraception, it was because it was a male-dominated society too, at the same time.
You don't know.
Oh, I think the chances are we could.
No, but there's other elements besides that, which we couldn't get into. There's also the elements, the Malthusian, we're having too many people in this world. That started back in the mid-1800s. I mean, there's a lot that we can be brought to bear in the last 150 years on this.
Yeah.
That being said, every Protestant reformer was adamant against this. You have to ask why. I mean,
and then we have to also ask, why have they changed?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I think they
Well,
changed.
I think a lot of it anymore is just because I'll decide when I do this, I'll decide when I do that, and they're really playing God. I'll decide to stop taking this drug, and I'll decide that I'm going to become pregnant, and I'll have as many children as I want to have. Just like everything else we do these days, it's all about whatever you want to decide because it's good for you. And because we've removed God from everything, and God doesn't have control of anything, so I'm in control of it. And I think it kind of...
Well, C.S. Lewis, he wrote a book called Abolition of Man, and it's a terrific book, and it's particularly about education, but in one part about it, he talks about the abolition of man, the chapter, how it's not really man's conquest over nature as much as it is man using nature as conquest over other men. It's just an interesting thing to, float out.
Are you using man as the,
mankind.
or using, or
Mankind.
humankind?
Well,
How are you using it?
I'm using it as humankind, mankind. To me, those are synonyms.
Yeah, well, they're not anymore. I mean, they're not synonyms
Well,
anymore for a lot of people.
I understand
It's
that
the
for a lot of
context
people.
of what you're mentioning, and I think
Yeah.
it's not really, I don't think you meant it as,
No.
male chauvinist sort of.
No.
But no, I am serious. We really have to be conscious that we use the word humankind if we're talking about all humanity. Because
Well,
there is a
it's not
difference.
worth arguing, but I would argue the etymology of that doesn't even, I mean, the idea that man is simply male, I don't think that that's been historically true. It might be true today.
but today, that's how we converse with each other. So if we want to talk to each other, male and female, then we're talking about humankind.
All right, well, I'm talking about humankind.
Okay,
So
thank you.
we'll do it that way.
Good.
Here's, in the end, just, I always like G.K. Chesterton. He's always very good to put things into small quotes. I was watching this very comfortable discussion between atheists and theists, and there was a whole different range of theists. In fact, I'm not even sure there was any Roman Catholics, so we had, Baptist ministers, and it was over in England, the United Kingdom, Anglican ministers and such. And they were going back and forth, and one of the atheists said, where's the golden period? You keep saying that all this has changed, marriage is different, all this. Can you show me the golden period? When everything been so great? And I thought, well, that's a good point. And I thought about it for a few days, and then it dawned on me, thinking of G.K. Chesterton. He said, man's always lost his way. That's always been the case. I mean, nothing's ever changed about that, but that's not the right, because usually we're not asking the right question. G.K. Chesterton said, that's not the right question to ask. Man has always lost his way. The difference today is man has lost his address. We've forgotten what it means. So, to be a human person. So, until we rediscover that, that's why, anthropology is the foundation of all these things. The human nature does not change. It's something that we can discover, we know by design, and then the closer that we are in line with that, the more that we are free. So, nonetheless. All right, well, we could talk after we're done, but I won't hold you up.
Oh, okay.
All right?
Basically, the way that